12th of September, 2025. We haven't done a That Was the Week show for a couple of weeks. I've been in Australia. A couple of weeks ago, we did a show about a classic Silicon Valley win-win-win. Can users, publishers, and tech companies really all benefit from the AI revolution? Keith said yes. I wasn't so sure. In the last couple of weeks, I think Keith has doubled down. He's gone a little crazy. He is talking now about why exuberance when it comes to the AI revolution is required. It's the rational response to what's happening. Keith is joining me, as always, from the heart of exuberance, Palo Alto. Keith, what's happened over the last 2 weeks? Have you gone mad?
No, I've always been mad, Andrew, as Pink Floyd famously said in a song. You remember that in the background? I've always been mad. But no, I've been observing, Vinod Khosla probably comes to mind, discussing whether there is a bubble and whether the current pace and scale of investing in AI is best described as exuberance in the pejorative sense, or is a good thing. And this week's articles, especially one by John Callahan, who talks about the price of growth being very high, but the output of growth being even higher still, kind of brings it all into light. And there was a conference, I think it was called Connected. I forget what the conference was called, True Ventures, where John works, put on, which attracted a big crowd in San Francisco to discuss it.
So this idea, you suggest that that it's rational, not exuberant. Is this from whose point of view? You suggest that obviously from an investor's point of view, it makes sense because they got to get in on the action. But are you suggesting that everybody, creators, ordinary users of technology, they should all be, that it's always at this point in early September 2025, that it's rational to be exuberant about all this new technology?
Well, look, I think there's only two possible ways of thinking about it. If this is craziness, then the craziest of all are the investors, because they're the ones who are going to lose their shirt, and the users are going to benefit from pretty much free AI. So the users are the least damaged. If it's a good thing, the investors are going to make a lot of money as a total group. Of course, it won't be evenly distributed. Some will make a huge amount and others will lose money. But as a group, they'll make a lot of money, and the users will still be fine because they'll benefit from free AI that gets better and better and scales higher and higher. And ultimately, if you can imagine a kid in an English class in an African country that has poor infrastructure, being able to have an Android phone that gives them access to the best AI in the world, that's a leveling up, the like of which we've never seen. So, the underlying outcome of these huge investments, and they are huge and fast, the underlying outcome is something that, if it works out, we should all embrace.
So The Economist, I'm not sure if you included this in your newsletter this week, but The Economist's cover story was on what it calls a $3 trillion AI investment. And it asks, what if it goes wrong? Your attitude, Keith, seems to be that it can't go wrong. Is that fair, or am I wrong? I mean, the reality is that for better or worse, $3 trillion now has been invested in the AI revolution. Are you suggesting that it's impossible for this thing to go wrong now, that it's inevitable that it's going to work out?
I think it can, at the level of an individual investment. For example, yesterday, Perplexity announced a big investment at a $20 billion valuation. That investment could go wrong. But if you're talking about all the investment in AI, it really can't go wrong. Why? Because there's a genuinely transformative element to AI that, by most experts' predictions, is likely to add something like 20 trillion to global GDP by 2035. So 3 trillion becomes a small number. That's John Callahan's point. And so even though the numbers are big, the predicted gains are bigger. And as we know, GDP, once enshrined within companies, trades at a multiple of that number, something like 20 times. So 20 trillion of GDP equals 400 trillion of value in companies. So it's a massive value that is being sought. Can it go wrong? Yes, in individual cases, and there will be some bloody noses or egg on the face, but not in the macro level.
Well, the macro level is very long term. Your argument seems to be like if we were arguing in the middle of the 19th century about the Industrial Revolution, that in the long run, the consequences of the Industrial Revolution be beneficial. I mean, that's another argument when it comes to the environment. But leaving that one aside, I mean, none of us live forever, although you're talking about technology. Yamanaka this week that maybe suggests we might one day live forever, but none of us live forever. So the reality is that we do, for better or worse, as investors or users, live in the short or medium term. So this $3 trillion AI investment, I mean, we need to historicize it, which is what the economists do. They compare it to previous booms, railways, telephone, electric light. In your view, is this equivalent to some of the other great booms in history, the dot-com, particularly electricity, telephone, railways, which they focus on? And one of the things that The Economist, I thought it was a good piece, suggested that you have overcapacity, maybe in the short term, but it nonetheless has a detrimental economic impact.
The Economist argues it has a detrimental economic impact.
Well, in the sense that you have overcapacity. So I'm quoting them, amid the British railway bust of the 1860s, losses were concentrated amongst banks. I mean, this is real money being invested for one reason or another, and it's not guaranteed that everyone investing will win from the investment.
Well, that's. I mean, you're right, Andrew, but that's just the nature of investment. It's a bet, and you know, if you bet on an index, you almost never lose. The S&P 500 being a case in point. If you bet on an individual stock, there's a pretty good chance you will lose, especially in a constrained period of time. So, but I'm not sure that's the right framing to assess the moment.
So are you suggesting that the Economist cover story, they're classically pessimistic, that they don't get it? What's the problem with this story?
I would suspect inside The Economist there'd be other people who would write the opposite story. I think it's basically clickbait to attract skeptics to buy The Economist. And you know, it is a question, what if it goes wrong? It's not a prediction. And it's saying that in every other transformative era that everybody would agree produced good outcomes over time, there were moments of regret. And that's okay. I think that's fair. It just doesn't matter.
Well, let me quote, and I'm quoting The Economist because they know their numbers. It already ranks amongst the biggest investment booms in modern history. This year, American large tech firms will spend nearly $400 billion on the infrastructure required to run. But they argue that there's no guarantee, and I'm quoting him here, no matter what happens, many investors will lose money. In the rosiest scenario, AGI will arrive and usher in a new world of economic growth of perhaps 20% a year, which is what you talk about. Some shareholders would enjoy astronomical returns. Many others would face big losses. Do you think they're wrong?
I don't think that's wrong, but I think the 20% a year is part of what they're saying and is likely to be right. And that's huge, by the way. The world economy has never grown at 20% a year ever. So clearly, if your job is to make money by buying the future today, you probably should be fired for not investing in AI.
So it's rational. I mean, this is your point in the editorial, that it's a rational investment. Anyone who isn't investing, anyone who isn't exuberant, is actually irrational, in your view.
They're conservative. They're possibly rational. They're just not going to benefit from the outcomes, and that's fine. Not everybody has to play the game, if you will. So I'm not criticizing people who stand on the sidelines. I'm just saying those who take the risk will get the reward, unless they're one of the few that make bad bets and lose their money. And there will
What do you think the biggest risk then is? I mean, you're unusually optimistic, or maybe not unusually optimistic in Palo Alto. Not everyone shares your optimism. What do you fear here? Is it a short-term meltdown of the stock exchange? Is it the failure of companies like OpenAI to make money? What's the biggest risk here?
I think the biggest risk is to replicate the failures of previous transformations. You know, if, you're probably familiar with most of the early television conversation about how transformative television could be to education, for example. And it turned out that we got, you know, reality TV and soaps and advertising. Same with the internet. It should have been transformative of human experience. But again, we got traffic, attention seeking, algorithms, and advertising. So the biggest fear with AI is that its potential is undermined by poor business models that don't serve human need.
But it still benefits the investors and the companies. So are those two things compatible? I mean, do you think that this one will be different? Why will it be different?
Well, there's a kind of a hidden upside in AI. AI basically consumes content in order to have the capability of answering questions or discussing concepts. And it really isn't a traffic engine. It's a knowledge base. A very clever and getting cleverer knowledge base with some reasoning, some research capabilities, even some invention capabilities, as we see with DeepMind and human proteins and all the stuff related to lengthening life. So that's very different to the internet, which was a mass audience, attention-grabbing, clickbait kind of platform. AI has, because it's subscription-based and you pay for what you consume through APIs, it doesn't need natively an advertising business, and therefore it doesn't need to undermine what the right outcome is for humans in order to pursue profit. So there's something beautiful inside of it. The previous 2 weeks, I did a newsletter last week, and it was all about this as well. The question last week was, what is the business model for AI? And I think the business model is surfacing knowledge, which probably should include links to content, attribution, if you will, that could produce a very big business model without undermining its potential. And my fear will be that that doesn't happen, that Sam Altman turns into the Google ad network.
There's also the issue, I mean, you and I have talked about this endlessly, of content and how people are paid back from AI borrowing the content. I mean, there are IP issues involved here as well. You seem to take it for granted that creators will benefit from this, although many creators are deeply fearful. Many of them are indeed already suing AI companies. How is it guaranteed that creators are going to benefit from this? And should they be paid for the intelligence they lend to these engines?
there's no definite outcome there, but there's a couple of possible outcomes. The first thing to note is that creators are hooked on traffic and attention just as advertisers are. You know, if you think about the pre-internet creator, you had to sell a magazine or a newspaper, or, you know, a TV show had to be watched. And you know, in those days, most newspapers made money from classified advertising and subscriptions, or people actually buying the product. As the internet came along, increasingly content creators gave away their content for free in the hope of monetizing it through advertising. So they fell in with the internet business model, and that led to some good outcomes and some bad ones. The end of the open web, which Google talked about this week, it's another article in this week's newsletter. The end of the open web, which is all about the decline in people reading websites, it's about 8% this year, points to a future in AI where there really won't be the possibility of monetizing content through traffic. So subscriptions and the quality of your product are going to have to reign supreme again. And that's a challenge for most creators. Absolutely.
Not for us, for our show, though.
Not for our show at all. No, we are
one of the best shows on the internet, don't we?
It's compelling. I mean, mainly due to my level of energy.
I agree. And your rational exuberance, Keith.
Exactly.
Rather than irrational exuberance.
But I do think content creators have an adjustment to make. Now, I said there were two scenarios. The second is that content creators embrace AI, and AI embraces links, which is what I believe should happen. There's a lot of devil in the detail there, but that would basically allow the AI ecosystem to have the similar scale of monetization for creators as the current internet does.
I mean, in my view, I don't. Some of the things you say, I don't necessarily disagree with, but I do think that, borrowing your language, the devil is in the detail in the short term. Clearly, there are going to be some downturns. Maybe there'll be a bust, maybe there won't. The interesting thing, and the Economist deals with this, is fearing the burn. What would happen if there is a crash, or at least a very sharp correction? In the dot-com boom, it didn't really matter because it was mostly private, and I guess it brought the stock market down. What's interesting, the difference between 2025 and the 90s was that most of this is being led by a tiny handful of big tech companies as opposed to dot-com startups. So I'm not sure whether this makes the broader economy more or less vulnerable to a sharp correction. What's your take?
Well, you're definitely right that there's a concentration of money in a few hands. And that goes for the whole value chain of money. Only a small number of venture firms are raising large funds. And those same small number, 10 or so of them, are making a lot of the big bets. And those big bets are being made on a small number of companies, maybe less than 50 globally. So, this week, AMRL in Holland invested 1.3 billion in Mistral, the French AI company, which is an unheard of.
Yeah, well, the FT had a good piece from this week suggesting that still in US terms, it's
small,
minimal.
Yeah. It's small.
Pocket change.
Yeah, but it's a corporate investment. It's not a VC investment, so that's kind of interesting. And ASML are the people who create chip designs. So it's kind of interesting. Now, so I think that there is a concentration of money. Whenever there's a concentration of money, a single point of failure can have an ecosystem impact. That's also true. For that to happen here, I think OpenAI, which just announced how it's going to deal with its not-for-profit status this week, OpenAI and Anthropic would have to be the two that go into some kind of a crisis. Now, with OpenAI placing a $300 billion contract with Oracle this week, which, by the way, has doubled Oracle's share price. So Oracle's now worth over $1 trillion.
Yeah, and Larry Ellison now is even richer than Elon Musk.
So if something went wrong there that impacted both OpenAI and Oracle, that would have stock market consequences. But the example I would give you to frame what would be the consequences of that is the Channel Tunnel between the UK and France. It went bankrupt. It did have that big crisis. Admittedly, it doesn't impact the whole ecosystem of world capitalism in the way that AI might, but it was major. And what happened is it got bought out for pennies on the pound and is now a thriving business. So the human gain of the Channel Tunnel, survived, and the human gain of AI would survive because these models that get trained, they don't have to be retrained to still be as good as they are. They just keep working. So and running them isn't the expensive bit; it's training them. So I think overall, the human impact of a crisis is likely to be quite well contained if there were one. And I don't think there is any signal that there's likely to be one.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this, and maybe it's a subject for another show, whether I think I agree with you on OpenAI, particularly OpenAI and Anthropic. Whether their business models actually work, I'm still not 100% convinced that OpenAI has a business model. They're pouring billions of dollars into investment, but whether they can make themselves into a profitable business, I mean, The Economist addresses this, is still not entirely clear. But in your mind, it is. You think that it's inevitable, really, that OpenAI will be ultimately profitable.
Yeah, I think inevitable is too weak a word now, because I think.
Well, what's a stronger word than inevitable?
I think all predestined.
Predestined.
It's already happened. I mean, they announced even larger revenues than they previously predicted, and they've increased their guess at the next 2 years, and it gets well over 100 billion in revenue in a time frame that we can predict from today, because it's soon. So I think that's predestined.
I gotta put that in the title. Predestined. That's even stronger than. Sounds a little religious. Predestined.
Yeah, but only from the standpoint of today. I wouldn't have said that a year ago.
But some people might argue that, well, it's all very well to build this massive revenue, but there are many costs, and it's still not entirely clear that for a profitable business, your revenue needs to be higher than your costs, and it's not clear if OpenAI can do that. But you believe that that's also predestined.
I think if you're the CFO at OpenAI, the way you think about it is roughly this: it costs you a certain amount of money, 300 billion seems to be the number this week, to continue to train better and better models. It probably costs you something like, if you want to serve the entire world of up to 8 billion people, it costs you a fraction of that 300 billion to use existing models to serve those people. And so it's a little bit like the CFO of Amazon keeping building warehouses, thus making Amazon unprofitable for most of its life. But the scale of its revenues continue to grow. And it's a trade-off between how much you spend, how fast you spend it, and what it delivers in terms of gross revenue. At some point, you can turn off the spending and only have the revenue, which is what Amazon did. Because
and Amazon, I think, is a good case where, and I don't know enough about the economics of the period, but how Amazon continued. I mean, even in the great crash of 2000, they somehow not only survived, but continued to spend. They were able to convince Wall Street that they had a long-term viable business, even if they weren't profitable. I guess the same is true of OpenAI, which makes Sam Altman the Jeff Bezos of the 2020s.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would want to be the Jeff Bezos of any era. But that's, have you met Jeff?
Well, I'm not sure. Would you want to be more like Sam Altman or Jeff Bezos? I mean,
I personally would want to be more like Elon Musk, but that's just me.
Well, that's your own particular weakness. We haven't dealt with one of your friends, Elon Musk, not the most popular fellow in the world, but you seem to like him. what's Musk been up to this week that you found impressive?
You know, he's a month or two out of his Doge job.
Is that before we get to what he's been up to? Does that in any way? I mean, you're an overt admirer, unabashed, unambiguous admirer. Is that in any way the Doge chapter, which is certainly not untarnished, has that affected your opinion of Musk? But you just think it's one of those things?
Well, I think he gets credit for quitting, which is what happened. And he was asked this week on this interview what lessons he learned from it. And his answer was short and sweet. He basically said, I learned that the government is basically unfixable, which you and I probably would have known ahead of time. His brashness led him to believe he could fix it. And he learned very quickly he couldn't. Why? Because embedded bureaucracies are not prone to change. Generally speaking, revolutions are the only thing that seems to change them, and they're rare.
So what's he been doing this week that's important?
So he was interviewed about everything he's doing by the All In podcast, which is a friendly environment for him. They had an All In summit in LA. I think they had 2,000 or 3,000 people there. And it's a very sanguine interview. But the bit that I focused in on was prior to him coming on stage, Alex Karp from Palantir was on stage and had said that the West, in quotes, had reached a period where it has a suicide wish. And when he says the West, he means a whole set of ideological gains that come from the Enlightenment and represent the definition of progress and stuff like that. Musk was asked his opinion and said, you know, the evidence suggests that there's a suicide wish. That is to say, we, the Westerners, are now alienated from our gains from the past and don't like them anymore. But
where's it? What exactly is he talking about?
I think he's talking about everything from environmentalism to the trans issues around whether former men could play in women's sports. He's basically saying that ideologically, we've arrived at a place where, like, we're ashamed to be white if we're white because it's racist to be white. You know, basically we've gotten so confused about our desire to be good that we've started hating ourselves and what we represent.
But what's that got to do with environmentalism? I mean, aren't those real issues? Is he just denying them?
Well, he doesn't deny them. He makes the point that humans in the Enlightenment tradition are the solution to all problems. But in the current narrative around environmentalism, humans are the cause of all problems and probably not able to solve them, other than by conserving. And conserving really isn't change. Conserving is slowing down, whereas innovation like infusion technology or solar and other,
or Yamanaka
is active improvement by humans. And the balance of the narrative is humans are bad, is what it's saying. And I think there's truth in that.
Well, I mean, it seems a very Manichaean way of looking at things. What about Alex Karp? I mean, a lot of people would argue that Palantir is a problem. They create weapons that don't necessarily benefit mankind. What was he saying?
Well, Palantir doesn't actually create weapons, just to be clear. They create software that applies intelligence to large data sets to understand things. He was explicitly asked whether that includes surveillance of US citizens. And he answered that they don't do surveillance of any citizens.
So what does Palantir? So they're not in the war in the military warfare business. Palantir.
He said they've never won a contract from either the FBI, the CIA, or any of the.
So what's their business then?
Their business is managing large data for intelligence that can lead to better planning and organization, broadly speaking. Obviously, that's an umbrella that can mean lots of things in lots of contexts. But government is one of their biggest customers, just not this, not the enforcement part of government.
So for you, Palantir is another example of rational exuberance. These are good things. Could you ever imagine a tech company that's bad, Keith?
I honestly, Andrew, I don't know enough about Palantir at any level of detail to have an opinion. But
you sound like you're ducking that one. I think you know that Palantir isn't quite what you're presenting it as. But maybe we'll do another show on Palantir.
Yeah.
And Karp is a controversial figure too, as is Musk when it comes to this idea of progress. I mean, this idea of the West committing suicide is an old idea. It gets repeated every generation, it seems.
As a former sociologist thinking about writing about America, it is an intriguing framing.
In what way?
Well, I think it captures a lot of the zeitgeist when you frame it that way. If you want to understand lots of apparently separate things going on, it does create a kind of a coherent way of understanding lots of mainly cultural beliefs that have formed over the last 10 or 20 years, and the impact of that on creating a Trump second term is kind of interesting to me.
So when we put all this stuff together, Keith, this $3 trillion investment, the idea of people like Musk and Karp that Western civilization is about to destroy itself, do you think that we're in an unusual moment in history? It sounds as if both the gains and losses are enormous.
It's a confusing moment because very opposite trends are happening simultaneously. You know, if John Callahan and Chamath Palihapitiya had their way, the optimists about tech would transform, you know, human culture 20 years from now into one where work is optional, everyone has a good life, and technology drives value for everyone in the world. If the opponents of that view, and let's just pretend for a moment that the Economist is an opponent, although I think it really isn't, then we're heading for some kind of apocalyptic, you know, dystopianism. And, you know, I think you could make a case for both. Even I could make a case for the dystopian, which would be the benefits of AI are not distributed to the world, but are held in a small number of hands, which I wouldn't approve of. But that means that the binary or very polarized world we live in that came into light this week with the assassination we all saw probably doesn't go away, that polarization, for a while until the results are in, if you will.
What does the I don't know what does the assassin? You mean you're talking about the event in Utah? What's that got to do with it?
Well, it's an expression to me of polarization, extreme polarization.
Well, it's one crazy guy.
Well, there's been a few crazy guys shooting at people they disagree with recently, right? Including assassinations in a few cases and near misses in others.
But there were similar things in the 60s, and things worked out. We didn't have an apocalypse back then. So is it likely today, you think?
I'm not predicting an apocalypse because I think a rising tide lifts all boats. And if AI delivers as it should, everyone's going to calm down as life gets better.
So you think that AI might even calm crazy assassins down?
I don't know if I think it. I hope it.
Well, finally, Keith, my interview of the week is with Bruce Schneier from the Kennedy School, very influential thinker. I call him the godfather of security. He actually believes that AI can rewire democracy. So he's cautiously optimistic. I know you saw this interview. Is Bruce on the right track?
I thought he was great. He's extremely nuanced. I think you kept trying to test whether he, you know, had a kind of.
Is he as nuanced as you?
I would like to.
That was a joke. That was a joke. Go on, move on.
All right, I won't answer. No, I thought, look, what is democracy? It's the people electing governments that serve them. Will AI help in that? Well, it certainly should help people have access to knowledge and information. It will give them tools to propagate their opinions, which is a good thing in democracy, right? I mean, we don't want to close down even opinions we disagree with. We want a healthy discussion, a healthy debate, and we want tools that facilitate that. And at the end, we want to elect a government of the people, for the people, by the people. Right now, politicians are held in contempt because they're all trying to game the system. Look at Trump and the Supreme Court, for example, as an example of that. So could AI help humans prevent gaming? Certainly could. I'd be in favor, for example, of digital voting, where your ID is on your smartphone and you vote from your smartphone. AI could certainly prevent fraud in that context and facilitate engagement. That would be a good thing. The opposite of what Trump calls for, which is people have to show up in person with an ID card. So yeah, I think there's potential there, but just like you might think that AI is a little bit dreamy and idealistic, so is this view, because the current situation is that politics is the rough house.
I like rough house, but maybe I'm unusual here. That's what I try and do on the show. You've been very generous, Keith. I've been away 2 weeks. I have to be careful. If I think I go away for 4 weeks, what would happen? Is there a stronger word than predestined? What would happen if I didn't show up for a month? Where would you be? I need you. You need me to keep you on the straight and narrow, bring you down to earth.
Absolutely. We might say it's already happened, which is even stronger than predestined.
It's already happened. Well, it's certainly happening this time next week. God knows where Keith will be. Certainly
London.
Yeah, he's in London. Actually, we're not doing a show next week, or we are.
We're definitely not doing one on Saturday because I'm flying back. Sunday, I think we said we'd do one.
Well, we'll see if we can get any further than the predestined inevitability of AI benefiting all of mankind. Great conversation, Keith. Keep well, safe journey to London, and we will talk next week.
And by then, Andrew, I'll have my new earpods that can do simultaneous translation in when two people speak to each other, which I'm looking forward to. See you all next week.
Yeah, and you featured that, people speaking French, which is always a bit science fictional. So we will talk next week. Keep well, Keith.
Bye.